Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. As part of our how-to series, we're going to look at an important distinction between what I call the internal and external tracks of your life, so that you can know where to assert your column's work and see a potential roadblock you may have found if you focus too much on the external track. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below and we'll get back to you personally. And finally, you can reserve your place in one of my seminars or purchase any of my mind-body guides, also known as the PDFs, at www.crushingdoubt.org. Now, without further ado, here is a new way of looking at the columns work and how to work internally without being hampered by the external. In one of my recent sessions, I was assessing a roadblock we were facing in getting movement in the power column, though this problem could have occurred in any of the columns. And the solution I came up with felt like one I had to pass on to the rest of you. As always, I'm left marveling at how much each problem leads to more gains in my system. Each problem, as it turns out, is an opportunity for me to get the system even better for us all. Remember that one of the strengths of my system is that it is flexible and incorporates individual issues that pop up. On top of that, every individual issue I encounter, I know is almost always going to apply to thousands of people. This one does too. So what was the roadblock? Well, it came from a type of problem that I mean is a great compliment and see in many people. In a way, some people are actually drowning in strengths. They may be very nuanced, very self-aware, very adaptive, resourceful and capable, and quite well integrated. What's the problem, you must be asking? It all sounds great. Well, all of these great things make for great living for everyone around them. But with respect to their own living, it's a bit more complicated. These are a subset of people who are thriving in their lives, but having a mind-body experience that leaves them with lots of symptoms and misery at the same time. What I found in thinking about this type of central issue with symptoms and what they are communicating was that some strengths need a little bit of disentangling and rewiring. These are all great qualities, and if you have them, you don't have to give up any of them. But when it comes to mind-body symptoms, some people are almost too integrated to be able to address some of the mind-body needs. One important thing to recall in thinking these things through. Mind-body issues come from childhood, where emotions and thinking are quite primitive, especially in the early years. Couple this with the fact that mind-body issues tend toward the pre-verbal, before we could speak, meaning in year one of life, and you get a recipe for a problem that requires an understanding of primitive psychology to get better. But super integrated people are anything but primitive, and this is where the conundrum lies. So I thought about the central problem at hand. How to be sophisticated and integrated while also being able to be primitive and direct. And that is when I came to understand it in this session. This delightful woman, she will deny that that is the case, but she is, was always trying to live her life with other people factored in fully, all of the time. As such, there was no way for her to make any adjustments that were only about her and her own needs. I love that she factors in other people and don't want to stop that because the world would be a better place with more people like her and all the other goodists out there. But she needed a way to address things in her own life as well. Now here's the best news of all. She can do both, and so can anyone else. So here's what I noted with her. She was trying to address the emotional themes in her emotions column and the things that emerged in all three of her columns in the context of the external world. This led me to share an idea with her that I had experienced myself but not put fully into words. When I am dealing with symptoms, the external world, while I'm still operating in it functionally, kindly, and with perspective for others built in, it kind of becomes irrelevant to the symptom work. Let me say that again in another way. The external world is still relevant with respect to me behaving myself and doing a good job, but it is not relevant to an understanding of my symptoms or even choosing action steps to resolve them. The concept that emerged with this woman was the idea of keeping two simultaneous awarenesses going at the same time and being able to see them separately. And in a way, that is a lack of integration. It is unintegrating. There is an internal and external track. By unintegrating the two, temporarily at least, we can begin to see the distinction and where to do the work. Managing symptoms is all about the internal track, with occasional external interventions or action steps. The unintegration is the first step, and then you can start to spend time distinguishing between the two tracks and living well in each of them separately. Then you can reintegrate per se. Although I have to say, why bother? One could argue that having these two tracks separated out, defined clearly, and both functioning well is integration. Said another way, integration may be a bit overrated, or maybe even unrealistic. Now, what am I talking about with integration? I'm talking about bringing all the parts of yourself into one. That's good to do sometimes. What I'm saying is, in this case, especially when it comes to symptoms, you need to stop focusing on that, let it become two separate tracks, and then you can distinguish between the two. So what we need is a process of organizing who we are so that we are allowed to have unintegrated experience work well for us, be totally functional, and be less confusing. Integration can sometimes lead to confusion, unrealistic self-expectations, and pressure to keep certain parts of ourselves walled off. So let me close by identifying more what I mean about these two tracks so that they can be useful to you. While this is a work in progress of sorts, I am very clear on these two tracks and what to do with them so far. In the external track, you can actually put your feelings almost entirely to the side. In the external track, they aren't all that relevant, other than with key figures in your life who need to factor them in to their way of living so that you can get some of what you need from others. In the external track, you actually can let your perfectionistic side loose. Be the best you can for others, by all means, all the time. Take the perspective of others. Focus on empathy. Ask a lot of yourself with respect to other people. The external track, though, is the place where you both give to others and give to yourself with respect to feeling good about who you are. This is the place for goodists, but it is not the place for managing symptoms, and it is not the place for getting your internal needs met. You can function well in the external track when you have the wherewithal to do so. In the internal track, however, you can operate on a whole different plane. And as long as you have both tracks running simultaneously, all the good stuff towards others is already covered because the external track is still running. The internal track is the place where you can dip into black and white thinking, for example. Get primitive. Get savage. You won't feel it is so dangerous if you know it is only for the internal track. It's not going to be used externally. No one is going to get to see it or feel that wrath. The internal track is where you put the blame where it belongs. In fact, a lot of the action steps I've said exist in the internal track. You also get to be fiercely in your own corner here, most of all, because there are no consequences when others aren't even involved. They don't even have to know about it. The internal track is something you do with yourself. In the internal track, you get to be fully empathic to yourself, fully accept your own trauma, and all of the action steps I tend to recommend to resolve symptoms exist in that internal space where you don't need any help from any other person, and you don't even have to disable what you're doing with other people. In the internal track, it's not interactional. It's about addressing your relationship with you. Said another way, the power column itself is the internal track. Sometimes you're going to need to assert it with other people, but that's on the external track. You figured that out. One last thing. When you're taking action on things, you need to know which track it is that you're operating in. One of the reasons the woman I referenced here was so tired and felt so stuck is that she was trying to address all of her internal track problems on the external track, where she was still responsible to everyone else, and that really hemmed her in. This is exhausting. It's also impossible. You cannot do it. You cannot manage your own primitive, even if they're understandable, needs in the external track. There, it's a lose-lose situation. We either sacrifice ourselves to others, or we become the type of people we don't want to be, demanding attention and external fixes all the time. In the internal track, it's a win-win. You still get to go on being a good person, but now you also factor in you. By separating it out instead of integrating, it becomes very clear where to address which problems, and the method of addressing them becomes far less complicated. Now you can give yourself empathy, time alone, a quiet thought that settles things for you, a place for primitivity, and more. So I'm putting in a surprising plug coming from a psychologist. Don't try so hard to be integrated. Instead, separate out the parts so that you can see them more clearly, and then make your decisions on how to proceed. You'll be glad that you did, and ironically, I would argue that you will actually be a more fully integrated person in the real sense of the word, because you will be better able to function and also have a much better chance at reducing your symptoms. So you might feel a little less integrated inside you, but you'll function like a more integrated person. Use the columns mostly on the internal track. You only need them on the external track when people come barreling through or a toxic individual has broken in. Other than that, you get to have an entirely new track of thinking, all to yourself. No input from other people. Doesn't matter what they think because they don't even get to find out. This all happens while you run the rest of your life as nicely and smoothly as you can manage at any given moment. I really hope you enjoyed this episode on the internal track of your life and how distinguishing it from external can help you feel more clarity and resolution in choosing a path forward. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below and we'll get back to you personally.